No, Kim Woo-sung hadn't been a traitor. He had been a shield. They were in Incheon, standing over the wreckage of a deal gone wrong. Woo-sung's younger brother, a rookie in the organization, had been the one to take the fall for a shipment of narcotics that had been seized by the maritime police. The rules of the Lee dynasty were ancient and uncompromising. Failure was not just a fireable offense. It was a terminal one. Seung-Kwon remembered the way the sea air had tasted that night, salty and cold. He remembered Woo-sung kneeling at his feet, not as a subordinate, but as a beggar. He's a boy, Seung-Kwon. He didn't know the manifest was switched. Give him to me. I'll send him away. He'll never see Seoul again. But Seung-Kwon, young and obsessed with the ironclad reputation his father had built, had looked at the boy and seen only a loose thread. He had looked at Woo-sung and seen a man who needed to learn that loyalty to the family was higher than loyalty to blood. The law is the law, Woo-sung, Seung-Kwon had said, his voice as cold as the water below. He had turned his back, a silent signal to the executioner. The sound of the single gunshot that followed had echoed for years, but Seung-Kwon had assumed it was a buried echo. He had promoted Woo-sung, given him power, given him wealth, believing that the man's stoic silence was the ultimate sign of submission. He had mistaken a simmering, generational rage for professional discipline. He isn't doing this for the board, Seung-Kwon said suddenly, his voice raspy in the dark cabin of the sedan. Mide glanced at him, her hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. You finally figured it out? I killed his brother, Seung-Kwon whispered. I thought I was making a soldier. I was making a monster. You were making a man with nothing to lose, Mide corrected. She swung the car onto a side street, the tires splashing through deep puddles. Woo-sung didn't just find a better buyer. He found a way to make you feel the same hollowed-out silence he's lived with for 6 years. He's not just taking your business, Seung-Kwon. He's erasing your legacy so that you die as a nobody, just like his brother did. Seung-Kwon looked at the burner phone in his lap. The red tie, the target Mide had spotted, wasn't just a tactical choice. It was poetic. It was the color of the blood on the Incheon docks. Then he won't stop until he sees me burn, Seung-Kwon said, a new, sharper resolve settling into his features. He won't, Mide agreed, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. But he forgot one thing. He thinks he's the only one in this car who knows how to survive a ghost story. The car glided into a subterranean parking structure beneath an abandoned textile warehouse, the engine cutting out with a final, weary shudder. Mide didn't wait for the dust to settle. She reached into the back seat and pulled out a ruggedized, military-grade case, her movements possessing a fluid, practiced efficiency that made Seung-Kwon realize just how much he had been holding back at the lounge. He's hiring out-of-country contractors, Mide said, cracking open the case to reveal a glowing array of portable servers and a satellite uplink. Woo-sung's personal accounts are drained. He's funding this coup using your own black market escrow accounts. If he pays the final installment at dawn, those mercenaries will saturate every block of this city. We have to make sure that money never arrives. Seung-Kwon leaned over her shoulder, the scent of rain and cold iron clinging to him. He watched as her fingers blurred across the keys, a symphony of code cascading down the screen in emerald light. Those accounts are protected by triple-layer biometric encryption and a rotating ledger. My own father couldn't crack them without the master key. Your father never met a girl who grew up in the NSA's basement, Mide murmured, her eyes reflecting the scrolling data. The Ghost Protocol isn't just about disappearing, Seung-Kwon. It's about knowing that every digital system has a heartbeat. And right now, I'm going to give your empire a heart attack. She began the audit. It wasn't a crude hack. It was a surgical strike. On the primary monitor, the vast, sprawling network of the Lee family's financial holdings appeared as a glowing, interconnected constellation. Mide began to isolate the nodes Woo-sung was currently accessing. She watched the flow of capital, millions of dollars moving through shell companies in Cyprus, the Caymans, and Singapore, funneling toward a single clearing bank in Zurich. There, she whispered. He's using a vampire script. It's siphoning small percentages from your legitimate shipping fronts to mask the massive transfer to the mercenaries holding company. Can you stop it? Seung-Kwon asked, his hand tightening on the edge of the table. Better. I'm going to freeze the entire circulatory system. Mide initiated the lockdown. One by one, the glowing nodes on the screen turned from vibrant green to a stagnant, icy blue. She wasn't just blocking the transfer. She was triggering a massive internal audit flag across the global banking network. To the world's financial regulators, the Lee family's assets suddenly looked like a giant, glowing red flag of money laundering. In 5 minutes, every account associated with your name will be under a 24-hour administrative hold. Mide explained, a small, grim smile touching her lips. Woo-sung's mercenaries are professionals. They don't work on credit, and they don't stay in the field when the paymaster's check bounces. Suddenly, the screen flickered red. A high-pitched alert echoed through the warehouse. He's counter-patching. Mide hissed, her typing becoming more frantic. Woo-sung is using your own biometrics. He must have a recorded high-def scan of your retina and thumbprint from the office. He's trying to override the freeze. Seung-Kwon looked at the screen, watching his own digital signature being used to dismantle his survival. He's using me to kill me. Not if I change the lock, Mide said. She looked up at him, her expression intense. I need your real-time biometrics to override the spoof. I need to link your current pulse and retinal scan to the freeze command. It'll prove the other signature is a fake. She held up a small handheld scanner. Seung-Kwon didn't hesitate. He stepped into her personal space, his eyes locking onto the lens as the red light swept over his face. For a moment, the distance between them vanished. The Mafia Kingpin and the ghost analyst, bound together by a stream of data and a shared desperation. Identity confirmed, the computer chimed. The red flicker died. The icy blue of the frozen accounts deepened, locking the funds in a digital vault that even Woo-sung couldn't breach. The silence that followed was heavy. The mercenaries will be getting the payment failed notification in 30 seconds, Mide said, leaning back and exhaling a breath she seemed to have been holding since the bridge. We've cut off his oxygen. Now Woo-sung has no choice. He has to come for us, personally. Seung-Kwon looked at the dark monitors, then back at Mide. Then let him come. He spent 6 years waiting for this night. I think it's time we gave him the ending he deserves. The warehouse was silent now, save for the rhythmic hum of Mide's servers and the steady patter of rain against the corrugated metal roof. The blue light of the monitors cast long, skeletal shadows across the floor, stripping away the luxury of Seung-Kwon's world and the calculated anonymity of Mide's. For the first time since the glass had shattered at the lounge, the adrenaline had ebbed, leaving behind the bone-deep ache of two people who had been running for far longer than a single night. Seung-Kwon slumped into a worn industrial chair, the fine wool of his trousers catching on the rusted metal. He reached up, finally untying the red silk tie, the literal bullseye, and tossing it onto the table. Without the silk armor of his station, he looked less like a kingpin and more like a man who had spent 38 years carrying the weight of a dying dynasty. You're staring, he said, though there was no edge to his voice this time. Mide didn't look away. She was leaned against the edge of the desk, her fingers tracing the scars on the ruggedized case of her laptop. I'm looking at the man behind the tie. He looks tired. Tired is a luxury I wasn't allowed, Seung-Kwon replied, his gaze fixed on his hands. My father used to say that a leader's face is a mask carved from stone. If the stone cracks, the people beneath you start looking for a chisel. I've spent my life making sure no one saw the crack. Not even Woo-sung. He looked up, his dark eyes reflecting a weariness that went beyond the physical. Tonight, I watched my entire life work be dismantled in minutes. And the strange thing is, Mide, I felt a second of relief. Like the stone finally broke and I could breathe. Mide let out a soft, huffed breath that might have been a laugh in a different world. She reached up and pulled the pins from her hair, letting the sleek bun unravel. The dark coils fell around her shoulders, softening the sharp, tactical lines of her face. I know that feeling. 3 years ago, when I watched that car burn in Lagos, I knew I was losing everything. My career, my country, my name. But as I walked away into the dark, I felt light. I thought I could just be Mide the waitress. I thought if I didn't care about anything, nothing could hurt me. She looked around the high-tech sanctuary she had built in the shadows. But look at this. I traded one cage for another. I'm still hiding. I'm still wearing a mask, just a quieter one. I'm tired of being a ghost, Seung-Kwon. I'm tired of knowing exactly how a bullet travels, but forgetting how it feels to just sit in a park without checking the rooftops. Seung-Kwon stood up, his movements slow and heavy. He crossed the small space between them, stopping just short of her personal circle. The air between them was thick with the scent of ozone and the raw, unvarnished truth of two survivors. We spent our lives building walls to keep the world out, he whispered, his voice a low, rough vibration. But walls also keep us in. He reached out, his hand hovering for a second before his thumb brushed the smudge of dust on her cheek. His touch was hesitant, a stark contrast to the man who had grabbed her wrist with lethal intent hours before. Mide didn't pull away. She leaned into the contact, her eyes closing as she felt the warmth of a human hand that wasn't holding a weapon or a tray. If we survive this, Mide said, her voice barely audible over the rain, I don't want to go back to the masks. Neither do I, Seung-Kwon promised. In that dimly lit warehouse, surrounded by the cold machinery of war and the digital ruins of an empire, the Mafia Boss and the auditor found the one thing they had both been denied, a moment of peace that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with being seen. The armor was off. The hunt was still out there, but for the first time, they weren't fighting for a throne or a burn identity. They were fighting for the people they had discovered beneath the masks. The return to the skyrise was not a retreat. It was a ghost reclaiming its haunting grounds. The skyscraper loomed over the Seoul skyline like a monolith of glass and betrayal, its upper floors bathed in a cold, artificial white that bled into the low-hanging clouds. Below, the city moved in its ignorant, evening rhythm, but inside the lobby, the air was thick with the silent tension of a tomb. Mide didn't use the front entrance. She led Seung-Kwon through a maintenance shaft that bypassed the main lobby's biometric scanners, a blind spot she had identified months ago, while serving cocktails to the very men who now patrol the halls with submachine guns. They moved through the skeleton of the building, a symphony of shadows and steel. The executive floor is on lockdown, Mide whispered as they crouched in the dark and mechanical room on the 48th floor. She tapped into a junction box, her tablet screen blooming with the blue-tinged ghosts of the security feed. Woo-sung is in your office. He's not leaving. He knows the accounts are frozen, and he's waiting for the only person who can unfreeze them. Seung-Kwon checked the action on his weapon, the metallic click sounding unervingly loud in the cramped space. He wasn't wearing his jacket anymore. His white shirt was rolled at the sleeves, his chest protected by the ceramic plating Mide had provided. He's waiting for a dead man. Let's not keep him disappointed. They moved with a synchronized lethality that felt ancient. Mide acted as the eyes, using her tablet to loop the camera feeds 10 seconds at a time, creating a glitch in the reality of the guards. They bypassed the first security detail in a blur of suppressed gunfire and tactical positioning, leaving no alarms to ring. Seung-Kwon moved with a predatory grace he had suppressed for years, the stone mask of the Lee dynasty replaced by the raw, focused hunger of a man taking back his life. As they reached the final corridor, the scent of expensive cedarwood and ozone returned. The smell of the lounge, the smell of the coup. Two guards stood before the double oak doors of the chairman's office. Mide didn't wait. She slid a low-profile flash slug across the polished floor. A muffled thump and a burst of blinding light later. The guards were neutralized before they could draw breath. Seung-Kwon kicked the doors open. The office was a cavern of luxury, but it felt hollow. Kim Woo-sung sat behind the massive mahogany desk, his feet up, staring at the frozen digital ledger on the wall-mounted monitors. He didn't look surprised. He looked bored, the way a man looks when he knows the final chapter of the book, but is waiting for the ink to dry. "You're late, Seung-Kwon," Woo-sung said, not moving a muscle. He looked at Mide, his eyes trailing over her tactical gear with a flicker of genuine respect. "And the waitress? I should have realized. A woman with eyes like yours doesn't just pour drinks. You observe. You calculate. You're the reason the money stopped flowing." "The money is gone, Woo-sung," Seung-Kwon said, stepping into the center of the room. The glass walls behind them showed the city lights, a vast, sparkling kingdom that no longer belonged to either of them. "The board has already withdrawn their support. You're sitting in a chair that's currently being sold to the highest bidder." Woo-sung finally stood, his hand resting near the blazer of his suit. The chair was never the point. The point was showing you that the Lee legacy was built on sand. You killed my brother for a rulebook that you're currently burning just to stay alive. "I'm not burning it for the business," Seung-Kwon said, his voice dropping to a low, terrifying growl. "I'm burning it for her, and for the man I was before I met you." The air in the room charged with the electricity of a pending storm. Mide shifted her weight, her finger tightening on the trigger, her eyes locked on the shadows behind the curtains. She knew Woo-sung wasn't alone. The siege was just beginning, and the heart of the tower was about to become a slaughterhouse. The office erupted before Woo-sung could finish his smirk. From the hidden alcoves of the mahogany bookshelves, two more shooters emerged, their weapons raised in a lethal crossfire. Seung-Kwon dove, rolling behind a heavy granite pedestal as the air filled with the screech of ricocheting lead. Mide didn't hide. She moved with a predatory calculation, her mind instantly mapping the room in vectors and trajectories. She saw it before it happened, the ghost of a movement. Woo-sung wasn't reaching for sidearm. His hand went beneath the desk, clicking a remote detonator. A series of localized EMP charges buried in the ceiling hissed to life, killing the office lights and plunging the penthouse into a terrifying, strobe-lit darkness. "Mide!" Seung-Kwon's voice was a guttural shout, punctuated by the rhythmic thud of his own weapon. He was pinned. The two shooters were flanking him, moving in a pincer maneuver that left him no angle of escape. Mide felt the familiar coldness settle over her heart, the military-grade stillness that had earned her the name, the Weaver. She didn't look at the shooters. She looked at the glass. The floor-to-ceiling windows were reinforced, designed to withstand a hurricane, but she knew every material had a resonance frequency. She looked at the heavy brass chandelier hanging above the shooters, then at the angle of the rain-slicked glass behind them. She took a breath, the world slowing until the beat of her heart was the only sound in the room. She wasn't just a waitress or a ghost. She was a ballistics expert who knew that a bullet didn't have to travel in a straight line to find its mark. She pivoted, not toward the men, but toward the corner of the room where the structural steel met the glass. She fired. The first shot shattered the tension in the reinforced window. The second shot, timed to the millisecond, hit the brass mounting of the chandelier. The heavy fixture groaned, swinging downward like a massive golden pendulum. The shooters hesitated, their eyes tracking the falling light, and in that half-second of distraction, Seung-Kwon lunged, taking out the man on his left with a brutal, close-quarter strike. But Woo-sung was faster. He had circled around the desk, his weapon leveled at Seung-Kwon's exposed back. The law of the Lee family, Woo-sung hissed, his finger tightening on the trigger. Blood for blood. Mide had no clear line of sight. A massive marble pillar stood between her and the traitor. But she saw the reflection. In the dark, the rain-wet glass acted as a perfect, obsidian mirror. She saw Woo-sung's silhouette, the red glow of his weapon's laser sight reflecting off the window. She didn't aim at the man. She aimed at the reflection's anchor point on the glass, calculating the ricochet off the reinforced steel frame at a 42-degree angle. It was a shot that shouldn't exist, a theoretical impossibility. She pulled the trigger. The bullet sang. It struck the steel frame with a sharp, metallic ping, flattened slightly, and screamed across the room. It didn't hit Woo-sung's heart. It hit the hand holding the gun. The weapon flew from his shattered grip, spinning across the floor as Woo-sung collapsed, gasping in shock at the sheer geometry of his defeat. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sound of the wind whistling through the cracked glass. Seung-Kwon stood over Woo-sung, his chest heaving, his weapon lowered. He looked at the shattered steel frame, then back at Mide, who stood in the center of the room, her weapon still raised, her eyes hard and bright. The trajectory was impossible. Woo-sung choked out, clutching his mangled hand. "Only if you think the world is flat," Mide replied, her voice steady. Seung-Kwon didn't finish it. He didn't have to. The sirens were already rising from the streets below, and the ghost protocol had done its work. The mercenaries were gone, the accounts were frozen, and the man who had tried to build a kingdom on a grudge was left in the dark. Seung-Kwon walked over to Mide, his hand shaking slightly as he reached out to touch her shoulder. The cycle of blood was broken. The impossible shot hadn't just saved his life. It had cleared the path for a future where they didn't have to be targets anymore. The morning sun over the Han River was different than the neon glare of 3 years ago. It was soft, filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of a quiet apartment in Gangnam that smelled of roasted coffee and cedarwood. The scent of a home, not a fortress. Mide stood by the window, watching the city wake up. She wasn't scanning the rooftops for snipers or calculating the trajectory of a threat. She was simply watching the light play across the water, her pulse no longer a drum of war, but a steady, peaceful hum. In the hallway, the sound of hurried, small footsteps echoed against the hardwood floors. A 3-year-old girl with dark, tight curls and her father's defiant eyes burst into the room, squealing as she clutched a stuffed dragon. Seung-Kwon followed closely behind, his face transformed. The stone mask had been completely eroded by time and tenderness. He was dressed in a simple, charcoal gray sweater, his sleeves pushed up to reveal arms that now carried a child instead of a weapon. He caught Mide's eye and smiled. A real, unburdened expression that had once been an impossibility. He walked over, wrapping an arm around her waist and pulling her into the warmth of their shared reality. "She wants to go to the park before the gala," Seung-Kwon murmured, his voice a low, domestic vibration. Mide leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "The boring business gala? The one where we talk about logistics and shipping lanes instead of blockades and betrayals." "The very one," he chuckled. "I told her we have to be boring people today. It's our specialty now." Mide glanced at the wall near the entrance. There, hanging in a simple black frame, was a strip of crimson silk. It was the red tie from the Obsidian Lounge, clean to the glass dust but still bearing the slight fray where Mide's fingers had gripped it for dear life. It was no longer a target, it was a relic. It was a reminder that they had burned down a dynasty of blood to build a legacy of peace. The Ghost Protocol had become their permanent state, but in the best way possible. To the world of the Lee family and the international syndicates, Lee Seung-Kwon and the Weaver were dead, lost to the shadows of a failed coup. In their place lived 2 ordinary people who ran a legitimate maritime consultancy and spent their weekends arguing over nursery rhymes. "Is the coast clear?" Seung-Kwon asked, a playful echo of the words that had once been their only lifeline. Mide looked at her daughter, who was currently trying to feed her stuffed dragon a piece of toast, and then back at the man who had traded his crown for a life with her. She reached up, adjusting the collar of his sweater with a hand that no longer trembled. Completely, she whispered. Forever. They walked out the door together, leaving the red tie behind in its frame. Outside, Seoul continued its frantic, beautiful rhythm. The river flowed, the city breathed, and three people who had been forged in fire walked into the sunlight, invisible to their enemies and perfectly seen by each other. It was more than a survival story. It was a life. And it was finally, beautifully enough. Subscribe for more. If you love this blend of high-stakes action and slow-burn romance, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We have more stories of hidden elites and mafia legends coming your way that you won't want to miss.